The federal government has announced a major investment in the Canadian Armed Forces. It's spending almost $2.5 billion to buy 11 armed drones. Liberal MP Cody Boyce made the announcement earlier at CFB Greenwood on behalf of Defence Minister Bill Blair. He spoke about some of the benefits these remotely piloted aircraft bring to the military.
Being able to make sure that our men and women in uniform who protect us are able to operate this safely to help support our Canadian Armed Forces, but do so without having someone potentially in jeopardy, in danger, is a really important advantage. It also allows for longer capability. So when we look at the Arctic, for example, where there's a really changed environment, where we need to make sure we have capacity to monitor what's happening in the Arctic, the RPAS is going to be extremely important in that regard.
CBC senior defense reporter Murray Brewster joins us live with more. So Murray, you've been tracking this file for a long time. Can you tell us about the significance and how these drones differ from the ones Canada operated in Afghanistan?
That's right, Andrew. I've been tracking this file for about 20 years or so. Now, the big difference between these drones and the drones that were operating in Afghanistan is the fact that the MQ-9 is going to be able to be armed. In fact, Canada has already asked the U.S. government for permission to buy Hellfire missiles for these. The drones that we operated in Afghanistan, the Heron and the Spurwer, both were just surveillance drones. So that is the big difference, and it's partly driving the cost of this. Now, the MQ-9 is known as the Reaper, and as you see, it's pretty much like what you see in the Hollywood movies. So there's going to be a lot of infrastructure that's going to have to be built. The deal comes with 6 ground stations to operate these remotely piloted aircraft. The drones will be stationed, though, in Greenwood, Nova Scotia, and in Comox, BC, to provide surveillance over the country, but also off the coastlines.
And it'll be almost 5 years, Murray, right, until the military sees these drones. So what's behind the delay?
Well, it's partly because of the fact that the drones have not been shown to have a proven capability to operate in the Arctic yet. Now, we just heard the clip from the Liberal MP in Nova Scotia who was touting Arctic surveillance. Arctic surveillance is very important, but the technical problem for drones, and not only the Reaper but other drones, is the fact that they're operated by satellite, and satellite coverage in the northern latitudes is very spotty. So they're going to have to be working on that. The company that manufactures the Reaper has been testing the aircraft. It conducted one surveillance flight, one test flight to the north several months ago, and it went well. But that's not a proven capability. There's going to have to be a proven capability before it is certified to operate in Canadian airspace. The other aspect to this is that some Canadian electronic surveillance equipment is going to have to be installed on the Reaper, and that's going to take a little bit of time as well.
Murray, thank you. CBC senior defense reporter Murray Brewster, live in Ottawa.
As Murray Brewster was just telling you before the break, after more than 2 decades of debate and discussion, Canada's Air Force finally has the green light to acquire armed drones. Let's chat a bit more about this with David Pratt. He is the former Minister of National Defence, and he is now principal of David Pratt and Associates, and joins me now. Welcome to the program. Nice to see you.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's talk about this timeline. This was originally discussed, I believe, as far back as when you were defense minister, and now they really aren't going to be up and running for another 10 years. What do you think of that timeline?
Well, ideally, I suppose we should have gotten these aerial vehicles a lot sooner. But initially, I think the Government of Canada and Department of National Defence was looking at what Canadian capability might be available to do the job that these aerial vehicles are going to be doing. And then we got into a long period of, should we have a competition or not have a competition? And there was pressure, I think, from the Air Force not to go with the competition. And there finally was the beginnings of a competition, but one of the companies dropped out. So here we are years later. And fortunately, I think at this point, being able to actually acquire these aerial systems.
So you were listening to Murray's report there, too, that the North is still an issue because of satellite coverage. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the North has got to be, I think, one of our priorities, especially with the melting ice cap and the results of climate change. We're going to see more and more shipping through the Northwest Passage, and we're going to need to monitor that very, very carefully, I think, both in terms of any commercial shipping that might take place in the years ahead, or any military ships that, or submarines as well, that may be transiting through that area. So we're going to have to, in order to assert our sovereignty as a country, we need to make sure that we've got the systems in place to be able to do that competently and I would say persistently as well.
Just to be transparent here, you were working for a company that dropped out of the bidding. What can you tell us about that?
Well, not too much for reasons of commercial confidentiality, but I can say that the MQ-9 is a great platform. It's being used by many of our allies. The Americans are using it, the British, the Poles, the Belgians, the Netherlands. So it's got wide use right across the NATO alliance, and that's really important from the standpoint of interoperability with our allies. But what I think is important about this acquisition is that it's part of a system of systems. So, the MQ-9 is going to provide us with some pretty important ISR, that is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capability. The platform is capable of flying at 50,000 feet. It's relatively slow at 300 miles per hour, roughly. But it's able to stay in the air for 27 hours, which is very, very significant in terms of a surveillance capability. And when we're talking about the possibility of search and rescue, of illegal fishing off our coasts, or via vessels transiting the Arctic, that type of capability is very important. But it's going to be part of a system of systems for the Canadian Forces, which I think is important to sort of contextualize, because the MQ-9 brings a lot to the table, but so will the P-8 Poseidon when we get it. That's a very, very significant addition to Canada's ISR capability. In addition, we have satellites that, as you mentioned, they provide partial coverage, but we will also have we're also in the process of getting over-the-horizon radar. And that's, again, these systems all complement each other, and they provide very, very significant amounts of information. And I think one of the challenges going forward for the Canadian Forces will be how to process that information so that it gets to the right people on a timely basis.
Let me ask you this. You probably heard Murray mention this as well, that Canada has also talked to the U.S. about buying missiles. Mm-hmm. That's one thing that you didn't mention in what they can do.
No, yeah, but it is a very critical capability at a time when the world is really experiencing some serious conflicts. Canada may be called upon through NATO or through the NORAD mission to be able to carry out defense operations of an offensive and defensive character. So these MQ-9s are going to be important from that standpoint, because, as you mentioned, they will have the Hellfire missiles. I think they're also capable of firing the Sidewinder and different types of bombs as well. So it's not just an ISR platform, it's also a strike platform as well.
Before I let you go, I wonder what you think about the fact that this, the minister didn't announce this. This is billions of dollars to acquire these, and it's a pretty important acquirement to get these finally after 20 years. Why did this announcement kind of fly under the radar, so to speak?
Well, I know the minister these days is certainly quite busy. The last time I checked, he was in Latvia with the troops making announcements there. So I can't really, I can't explain why they announced it the way they did. But I do think this is an announcement that is worthy of, significant coverage, because it does add a very major capability to the Canadian Forces, and it's one that we've done without for quite some time. So I think today's a good day for the Canadian Forces.
Former Minister of Defense David Pratt, thank you for being on the program today.
My pleasure.